I would be, again, I've not been following that, but I would be very curious to understand if there are still people producing new coins using actual energy, and if they get rewarded. Because at this point, the cost of producing one has to have become quite high. And it would be interesting to see the correlation between the price at which they're traded and the cost of producing it. Okay? They're strange objects that don't have an obvious intrinsic value, but have an obvious real cost. So we're spending real money to produce symbols. Until the other day, all symbols had pretty much zero cost. Okay? Now we are actually investing real resources to produce symbols. So they're a new experiment from that point of view. Okay? So that's the historical part. Now, economic theory. If you looked at the little presentation by Lee that I sent you, if you notice, she quotes Higgs and this story of friction. I hate the word friction. Why? Because the word friction has become, unfortunately, very common in economic theory since Higgs and people in the 30s. And it's meant to suggest that the word, first of all, it's meant to suggest a classical mechanic analogy. The analogy is the model of classical mechanics, right, has no friction. Everything happens in the pure space. In reality, we have the real world frictions, and that's why we have to take frictions into consideration to compute, how fast the feather goes to the ground instead of the lead ball, how it travels on the surface of a table, and blah, blah, blah. In economics, there is the variation model, and everything else in the world is frictions, all right? I don't like that idea. As I said earlier in class, the variation model is a model. And it's not a matter of friction to make it realistic. It's a matter of, there are contexts in which the prediction of the variation model are the best approximation you have to what you observe in the data. And there are other cases in which, because of the millions of features of the real world, the variation model excludes, that model is not appropriate. End of story. And the vision that I start from the variation model and I add millions of frictions to it to make it realistic is just a completely crazy view. Because the amount of frictions you would have to add to it to make it realistic, would make the model disappear. What's nice about the model is that it's simple, clear, and transparent, and it points out some forces. If I have to add millions of things to it, then the model disappears. You might as well use something else. Models have to be simple, they have to be metaphor. There's no reason to keep adding friction. With money, we have clearly taken the other road. The reason seems to be, but frankly, I'm not sure. I guess it's Higgs, or if you want, in post-World War II economic theory, it's probably again Frank Hahn and other people that have posed the problem in that form. In the variation model, there is no money. For the same reason that in the variation model, there is no transaction cost, there is no information, there is no legal constraint, there is no government, there is not a lot of things. There is pure exchange and some perfectly efficient market. The reason because there is no money is because of millions of reasons. People have perfectly symmetric common information. Value need not be stored because everything is instantaneously exchanged, so there is no reason to store value intertemporally. There is no double coincidence of war because trading is centralized through a supercomputer. Okay? So the thing called money, no matter how it came around historically, what its purposes are, and who defines it, is just useless by definition because it cannot exist. In a variation, the variation model is about trading of commodities that have intrinsic value because they either enter in production or they enter in the utility function. That's what it is. Okay? For some reason, Higgs first, and then Patinkin and Hahn and others said, oh, I want to use the variation model, but I want to have a monetary side of it. Nothing bad with that. I think it's fine. It's a legitimate thing. I think I'm studying problems in which most of the features of trade are summarized by Eurasian markets, but there is money, something called money circulating, and I want to put into it. My view is that in this case you declare why you put money into it. And as you will see, money may be in there for many reasons. If I want to study the role of money in reducing trading friction, and only in reducing trading friction, so I don't want to talk about monetary policy, I don't want to talk about banking, I don't want to talk about credit, I don't want to talk about public debt, I just want to talk about what are the gains, the social gains, the welfare gains from having a common means of exchange. Probably the search approach is correct. Comparing economies where there is no currency and people have to barter or go through other means of other transaction cost in order to exchange goods, with an economy where people don't have to barter or go through other informational devices and transaction costs to exchange goods because they have an accepted common currency, I think it's a valuable enterprise. Okay? I think it's a valuable enterprise. And in that case, it's clear the money is there to reduce the transaction cost and avoid barter, and so you use it for that purpose. If you have to ask yourself, what is the monetary policy does? Well, you have to write a model in which money is there in the form in which central bank makes it. And central bank these days, not in the past, but these days and for a long while, have made money, the thing called money, by creating reserves, by creating base money, by creating, high power money, whatever, we give them many names. Well, then I put money in that form, and then at that point I have to put in the model not just search, because search is completely irrelevant as far as central bank is concerned, right? The central banks produce reserves by trading with a set of other institutions called banks. They don't trade with you, they don't trade with me, they don't trade even with FCA, otherwise known as Fiat or FICA in this country. Okay? They trade with a subset of banks, not even all of them, called commercial banks. But not even all commercial banks, only those admitted to the central bank operation with central bank interact. Okay? Well, in that case, that's what I call money. The thing I call reserves in the real world, the reserves in the central bank budget. And these are the same things? Not necessarily, right? Or even these are the same thing? Not necessarily. There is a relation between one of them. There is a relation between what I have in my checking account here, how much this bank has as reserves with the central bank, and how much I can charge on this card without being refused. But they're not the same thing. So the problem is that the thing we call money has actually a lot of ambiguous meaning, and if I want to use it in a model variation or not to carry out an analysis, I should say, here is the meaning I gave to it, here is why I want to study it, and therefore is the reason why I put it there and in this form. We instead have gone this very strange way that we just want to put a general theory of money by sticking it into a variation model through some market failure. Now the question is, and it seems to me a silly question, do we have an army because of a market failure? Is it true that the only way to explain all the institutions through which people carry out social arrangement is by measuring them against some, not even idealized, but completely idiotic at this point, variation model in which there is no such a thing? Do we also have doctors because of a market failure? There are no doctors in a variation model. Do we have marriage because of a market failure? You see what I mean? There's no much sense in trying to understand every single institution I have out there because of a market failure. Because there is no reason, either historical or theoretical, why that specific model is the alpha and the omega of social science research. It's a model. It's actually a model I like a lot. 80% of the papers I've written use that model. So I mean, I'm the last person in the world that can complain about the Varesia model. I made the little career I have on it. But on the other hand, you know, you can't turn it into a totem, a fetish, the unit of measure of everything. If I want to understand political power, I cannot start from a Varesia model. Maybe I should do the opposite. Because political power has existed since the day there was a tribe, but there was some big guy hammering all the other guys because he wanted to get the females. I'm sorry, it's he wanted to get them, the females. And I cannot state this word in a politically correct version. It's not she hammered them in order to get him, okay? That's political power. You may like it or not. It may be politically correct, but that's what it was. And that's what it is, right? It's about ruling. And ruling, depending on technological condition, becomes more or less socially useful, more or less socially kind, as a way of surviving. But as we notice, when the technological condition allows it, even these days, we have very brutal ruling. Ruling made with violence, ruling made with brute force to extract resources, period. Okay? So saying, well, there is brutal political power because of market failure sounds to me like completely ridiculous. No? Trying to understand the tribe, saying, oh, you know, they did not have a Eurasian market organized, there is a lack of symmetric information, and that's why they're beating each other up. Doesn't really explain why they're beating each other up. Instead, what is it Patinkin did? Patinkin was actually the start of this, says, I want to write a theory of money and prices which reconcile what had become at the time the commonly accepted Keynesian wisdom with the Varesia model. Because, funny enough, that's the problem. The problem comes by the effort, and I think Patinkin, who was, by the way, a fantastic man and a very smart fellow and a charming human being. He was my colleague at UCLA for 2 years. And Don Patinkin was a very nice man. But he belonged intellectually to a certain period. This is post-World War II economic theory. Okay? And what is that you have? On the theoretical side, you have the Varesia model. In the 50s, Mackenzie, and then Arrow, and then De Breuil, and other give a formal proof of existence of equilibrium. The model is complete, it's elegant, it seems to be working very well, it's very nice. People start writing also dynamic extensions of it, right? So people start writing how to use it over time, to do temporary equilibrium, and so on. So as a theoretical construct, it captures a lot of the intuitions economists have. Substitution effect, individual demand, individual interacting to make aggregate demand, and prices behaving sometimes strange, blah, blah, blah. It's a very rich way of thinking of the economy, okay? And on the other, you have what? The inheritance from the 30s, then the war, and the actual policies that are being implemented that are heavily affected by the Keynesian view. And the Keynesian view is a bit ambiguous, because remember, this is the 60s or late 50s. These days, people tend to associate the Keynesian view with the idea that the monetary policy has to be lax, that there has to be a big monetary expansion, that interest rate, but that's not the Keynesian view at the time. Right? The Keynesian view at the time is actually a little bit different. It says the monetary policy is not effective in certain situations, that it's not through monetary expansion that you do things, that in order to recover from very sudden depressions or sudden lack of demand or coordination failures, you need to have some form of fiscal policy that either reduces taxes or increases spending, even if it creates a temporary deficit. That is Keynesian view. And in some sense, if anything is Keynesian, that's Keynesian. I mean, it's akin to what the guy actually said, not theoretically, where he's very confused, but in actual day-by-day policy, was him. So forget about, people interpreting Keynes or theorizing about Keynes or thinking that they read the general theory or the treatise on money more carefully than other. Just look at what the guy did, right? And what the guy did was to try to get monetary discipline, work very hard to create a system of not so flexible exchange rates, right? And monetary coordination around the world using some anchor currency, and then advocate from time to time some ad hoc, in his view very smart, ad hoc form of fiscal intervention that sometimes, perceives that there is fear or panic and therefore supports demand with fiscal means and sometimes withdraws it. That's the actual case. The non-theoretical case, but the actual case. If you have to judge a man by his actions, which I think is the best way to judge a man and a woman, by their action, okay, then that's Keynes. That's Keynesian theory, okay? So Patinkin is trying to put these whole things together, but he wants to put money. So what is that he does? Well, he basically does this. He actually writes a long, big model with all the x's and the thing, but he writes a model like that. And let's put a T right away, okay? Which individuals demands two sets of goods. One is a vector of consumption goods, okay? And the other is something he calls money. People have done similar things before, but this is the most well-known. Money, Interest, and Prices is the book, okay? This is the most well-known formalization of that approach. It's the approach from which all the duality things or the irrelevance or money as a veil thing comes. These are the years in which, for whatever reason there is, I think it's confused, but that's the way people approach it. There is this need to separate the real. It's a way for the economists also to understand what their models do. So you want to have a real sector in which relative prices among real things are determined and quantities are decided. Then you want to have a monetary sector that in some sense defines the scale, but does not affect either the quantities traded or the relative prices. That's the conception they have. Okay? And so this is a very simple model where that's done, right? So there is a set of demands. So there are I individuals, each one with a demand I for a vector of goods, okay? And then there is also a supply of these goods by this individual, so you define the excess demands. Let me write this format. Demand by individual I as a function of vector of prices, as endowment of I, minus the supply as a function of prices, endowment of I, okay, equals 0, and this is for good J, okay? So I1, I are the individuals, J equal 1, J are the goods, right? So CT is an RJ, right? So that's the excess demands, and the excess demand have to be 0. If you want to be fancy, they have to be like this, okay? That's the physical demands, right? There are J of these. It's nothing, I'm just writing down your most trivial variations, right? You already know how to derive, these are demand functions derived from a standard maximization of utility under a budget constraint, supply functions derived by the same way, they, for each individual has an excess demand, and the excess demand has to be less or equal than 0, and it's measured in physical unit because this is demand of good J. I don't know, number of potatoes. Obviously, these demands are derived under budget constraint, and the budget constraint I've written for each individual as summation of prices, right? So for each J, there is such a thing, and then there is a budget constraint for each individual that says what? The sum for J equal 1 J of P JT DI DJ I minus SJI. Alright, let me say it, bada bing, bada boom. Sum for all good, individual I, less or equal than 0. Okay, that's the budget constraint of individual I. So what I do when I put money into here? Well, I give these people magically